Here's a shout out to those of you out there who would like to have a platform for your voice to be heard, but doing in an anonymous manner. Over the course of my interviews, I've made friends with many people and we are still in contact today. If you are keen, just drop me a comment on my YouTube video and I'll reach out to you. Hello, could you introduce yourself and tell us how you actually accumulated $4.6 million?
My name is Jane. I'm 39. I worked for about 16 years in Singapore across finance and technology roles. I stepped away from full-time employment at 38 after reaching financial independence. At the point I exited, my net worth was approximately 4.6 million Singapore dollars. 3.8 million Singapore dollars in liquid investments, 560,000 Singapore dollars in CPF, OA plus SA plus RA. Around 250,000 Singapore dollars in net property equity. Only the investment portfolio is used to fund my lifestyle. There was no single event. It was cumulative. I started working at 23. My starting annual compensation was about 72,000 Singapore dollars. By my early 30s, I was earning 180,000 to 220,000 Singapore dollars. My peak compensation in my late 30s was around 350,000 Singapore dollars, including bonus. Across my career, my average savings rate was between 55% and 70%. I kept fixed expenses relatively flat as income rose. I invested monthly, automatically. I did not time markets. Contributions continued during 2008, 2020, and 2022. Over 16 years, total capital contributed, including CPF, was roughly 1.9 to 2.1 million Singapore dollars. The rest came from compounding. The allocation was boring and consistent. On average, 75 to 80% equities, mostly global and US index ETFs, 10% REITs for yield and diversification, 10 to 15% bonds, SSBs and cash. I avoided individual stock picking. I rebalanced once a year. Total expense ratio across the portfolio stayed below 0.3%. Across market cycles, the portfolio delivered about 8 to 9% annualized returns in SGD terms. That return, applied consistently over 15 plus years, explains most of the growth.
So what exactly were you investing during these years to accumulate so much money?
Because minimum FIRE is sensitive to shocks. My current annual spending is about 125,000 Singapore dollars. Using a conservative 4% withdrawal guideline, the theoretical target would be about 3.1 million Singapore dollars. I deliberately targeted closer to 4.5 million Singapore dollars to account for market drawdowns, healthcare inflation, longer life expectancy, the ability to take on unpaid or low-paid work. That additional 1.4 to 1.5 million Singapore dollars reduces failure risk and decision pressure.
You could have stopped earlier. Why continue accumulating beyond the minimum FIRE number?
The portfolio generates about 190,000 Singapore dollars a year from dividends and conservative withdrawals. My expenses consume roughly 65% of that. The remainder is either reinvested or used to fund volunteering and creative projects. I'm not drawing down principal aggressively. 2 days a week are fixed for volunteering with an organization that supports mid-career workers who were displaced due to restructuring, automation, or industry decline. My role is not financial planning. It is operational and practical. I work directly with individuals who are trying to re-enter the workforce after a sudden job loss. Most are between their early 40s and mid-50s. I help them stabilize their daily routines and rebuild employability momentum. This includes structuring weekly schedules, setting realistic job search targets, and rebuilding confidence through repeated practice rather than advice. A large part of the work involves resume and interview preparation. I help them reposition their experience so it reflects transferable capabilities rather than job titles. We focus on explaining retrenchment clearly and neutrally, without defensiveness. I also run mock interviews and help them practice responding to age-related or industry-shift questions in a way that is concise and credible. I also support basic digital and workplace skills that are often assumed but unevenly distributed. This includes helping people get comfortable with collaboration tools, online applications, and presentation formats that have changed since they were last hired. The work usually spans 4 to 8 weeks per person, with regular sessions rather than one-off advice. I am unpaid by design. My annual out-of-pocket cost is under 5,000 Singapore dollars, mainly transport and meals. Relative to my portfolio cash flow, this cost is immaterial, which allows me to commit consistently without funding pressure or performance metrics. Creative projects take another 10 to 15 hours a week. This time is split across writing, small publications, and short documentary work. I write long-form pieces focused on work, identity, and decision-making under uncertainty, often informed by real cases but anonymized. These are not produced on a schedule and are not optimized for reach. I also collaborate with designers on small, data-driven publications. These are niche projects with limited print runs. Some recover costs, some generate a modest surplus. In parallel, I am learning documentary storytelling through short, interview-based projects with minimal production requirements and no fixed release commitments. Across all creative work, annual income averages between 20,000 Singapore dollars and 30,000 Singapore dollars. I treat this as optional income. It does not factor into my spending or financial planning decisions. The work exists because the time is available and the financial pressure is removed.
You step away at 38 years old, right at your peak earning power. Most people find it impossible to walk away with that kind of money. How do you mentally overcome the one more year syndrome? Do you have a specific I'm done moment, or was it a gradual detachment?
What was the hardest mental hurdle? When you are at the peak of your career, one more year is also about the opportunity cost. At $350,000 a year, every month I stayed was another $30,000 in the bank. I kept telling myself, if I just stay until next March, I can buy a bigger car. Or, if I stay 2 more years, the buffer is indestructible. What broke the cycle for me was a time versus energy audit. I realized that while my bank account was growing, my return on life was diminishing. I looked at my peers who were 10 years older. Many had the $10 million net worth, but they also had chronic stress, 0 hobbies, and distant relationships with their kids. I asked myself, will an extra $1 million at age 45 change my life more than having my 40s entirely to myself? The answer was a resounding no. I set a hard exit date 18 months in advance. I treated it like a project deadline. Once the portfolio hit the $4.5 million floor, I didn't look at the bonus cycle anymore. I handed in my resignation and didn't look back. You have to realize that in the one more year trap, you aren't trading work for money. You're trading your finite youth for numbers on a screen you've already admitted you don't need.
How resilient is this setup if markets perform badly?
I model scenarios annually. A 30% market drawdown combined with reduced dividends is manageable by cutting discretionary spending, mainly travel. Core expenses, volunteering, and creative work remain unaffected. The portfolio is diversified enough that I don't need to react tactically.
With a $4.6 million base and a spend rate that doesn't touch the principal, your net worth is mathematically likely to grow even larger by the time you are 70 years old. What is your philosophy on dying with zero versus leaving behind a legacy? Does the assets go to a family, charity, or foundation?
This is a constant debate in my head. Mathematically, because I only spend about 65% of my portfolio's yield, my net worth is actually projected to keep growing. By the time I'm 70, I could be sitting on $8 million or more. I don't subscribe to the dying with zero philosophy because I find comfort in the buffer. However, I've decided that any excess beyond my safety floor is for living legacy. I'm already starting to fund education for my nieces and nephews. For the long term, my will is structured so that the core portfolio eventually seeds a small foundation focused on adult education and vocational retraining, the same work I do now. I'd rather the money continue working for Singapore's labour force long after I'm gone.
Jane, you have mastered the math, but what about the social capital? In Singapore, the first question people ask at a dinner party is, what do you do? How do you navigate the social friction of being retired at 39 years old without sounding boastful or becoming a social outlier?
It was awkward at first. In Singapore, what do you do is shorthand for where do you sit in the hierarchy. When I first quit, I'd say I'm retired, and the conversation would just die. People either thought I was a trust fund kid or they didn't know how to relate to me anymore. Now, I lead with my active life, not my financial status. I tell people I work in workforce reintegration and documentary storytelling. It's technically true, and it gives them a hook to continue the conversation. I've realized that people don't actually care about your bank balance. They care about your utility and your energy. I'm Jane, who helps people get jobs now, not Jane the finance director. It keeps me grounded and prevents me from becoming a social outlier.
You spend 2 days a week helping retrenched workers rebuild their identity. Have you faced an identity crisis yourself? When your self-worth is no longer tied to a high-flying tag or finance title, what fills that void on a Tuesday morning when the newness of freedom wears off?
I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a void. For the first 6 months, I had phantom limb syndrome. I'd wake up at 7 a.m. and check my phone for urgent emails that weren't there. I felt a strange sense of guilt, like I was breaking the rules by being at a botanical garden on a Tuesday morning, while everyone else was in a meeting. The volunteering was my anchor. It's hard to have an identity crisis when you're looking at a 50-year-old father who just lost his livelihood. It put my problems into perspective. I realized my identity wasn't tied to my title, it was tied to competence. As long as I am solving problems, whether it's fixing a resume or editing a documentary, I feel like Jane. The freedom didn't change who I am, it just changed who I'm doing the work for.
What is one last thing you want to tell your viewers?
I accumulated aggressively early to reduce fragility later. The money provides stability. The excess provides choice. That's the structure for me right now.
For some of you who might already know, I run a small Telegram community. It's for like-minded people who are already fired, or seeking to fire. There's no ads, no sponsor and causes, as far as I can try to keep them out. So it's really a small community. If you're interested, do feel free to join, and I'll put a link in the comment description itself. And hope to see you there. If you like the video, please remember to like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.